So recently I've had a few questions from viewers regarding how I harvest and store my birch polypores. If you're interested in hearing how I do it, stay tuned. So this is a follow-up video to one I made about a year and a half ago when I just got into YouTube. And I recorded that video with an old point-and-shoot camera, so the video quality is not all that good. However, hopefully the information is still of value, and I'll put a link to that video right up here in the corner. Now, what I covered in that video was a lot about how birch polypores can be used for medicinal purposes as well as a little bit of history. What I didn't cover too much on was how I go about collecting them and harvesting them and how I keep them for long-term storage. So yesterday I went out and picked a few birch polypores, and today we're going to prepare them for long-term storage. So let's cut away now and go out and show myself collecting a few of these birch polypores. So the nice thing about looking for birch polypores is if you found them on a tree last year, they're probably going to be on that tree again this year. So I've got a dead birch in front of me, and as I climb up, a little bit out of reach, but there is a couple of brand new ones there, another brand new one just up there, and a number of older ones from years past above it. But it's dead birches you want to look for, and you don't always have to look up. Just over here, fallen birch tree, and some brand new birch polypores that I'm going to harvest. So in order to get the birch polypore off, you don't need any special tools. It's just a matter of reaching down, pushing down on it. It'll free itself from the tree, and you want to look and see if it has a nice white clean underside. This one is it's not brand new, obviously it's a few days, maybe even a couple weeks old, but it's still in very good shape, and I'm certainly going to be taking this one home and we'll show how to prepare it at home. Okay, so here's an assortment of the birch polypores I picked up yesterday. I picked up about maybe 8, 10, 12 birch polypores. I didn't pick up too many. I didn't need all that many because I still have quite a few left over from last year. It seemed to be an overly abundant last year, so I have quite a few left over in storage. So I just picked a few for demonstration purposes. So let me slide the majority of these aside. Pick one of the larger ones that I picked. Now I have found them a lot larger than this, but this is a good representative average size. So what I look for when I pick the birch polypore is one, to look at the top of it and look that it's a nice smooth brown color, and that the underneath is going to be nice and white. Now this has got a little bit of forest floor dirt on it, but not much. Nice and white. You can see the edges are starting to curl in, so this didn't just come off of the tree in the last week. This has probably been there the better part of the month. And I'm also looking to see if there's any bug holes, anything's been eating at it. Now it doesn't automatically mean that I'll toss it away if I have, because if it looks like it's still in pretty good shape, I'll cut around the bug hole just to make sure there's no bugs inside of it, because quite often they just chew at the surface, so I'll just cut that away. So what I'm looking for is something that's still quite soft. This is quite, it's firm yet still flexible is probably the best way to say it, and it still gives like a nice heavy sponge. Still got quite a bit of weight for it. What you don't want is to see a black underside, because that's last year's and it's already released all its spores. So this is still a fresh, nice fresh polypore. All right, so let's set this up on the cutting board. So it doesn't matter. Now I have two ways of storing them. I dry them or I freeze them, but it doesn't matter either way. I'm going to cut them into thin slices. You know, if I didn't do that, if I just left these whole out open somewhere in a dark, dry place, they're still going to dry. They're going to dry up and they'll be just fine. The problem is they're really, really difficult to cut once they're dry. You really want to do this while they're still fresh. Even now, these can be somewhat resistant to cutting. So you don't need any special knife, but you do want something with a nice thin cutting edge. A kitchen knife, a larger kitchen knife like a chef knife, will do just fine. The knife I'm going to be using today is my custom-made Nessmuck knife made for me by my friend Jamie Harris. And I'm using this just because I have it. You know, it's a nice knife. Why not use it? So all I do is I'll start at the outside edge and I'll just slice little thin slices off. 1/4 inch, as big as I want to have them. I try to make them as consistently the same size as I can, or same thickness that is, just so they'll dry at relatively the same weight. give you an idea what I'm looking at here. So here is a piece of the Birch Polypore, nice and white and clean inside, still very flexible, still a lot of moisture in it. In fact, if you squeeze it, you can see some of the moisture wanting to come out. You can see that bottom layer that I'm talked about in the other video that can be pulled away and used as a bandage if I took it off of the whole bottom over a cut, and it's clean, sterile, and has antibacterial, antiseptic qualities to it. Or it can be dried and used as a strop for a knife. That's why it's sometimes known as the razor strop fungus. But I'm going to take all these and I'm going to slice them up, and we're going to prepare some for the freezer and some for the dehydrator. So once I get these sliced up, I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so the process for dehydrating or drying the Birch Polypore mushroom is very simple. I like to use my dehydrator. Now, this is a brand new dehydrator I just purchased recently, upgrading from another older dehydrator. It doesn't have to be a high-end dehydrator. If you do have an option where you can set the temperature, set it at its lowest temperature. You don't need to have this very warm. You don't need a dehydrator at all. You can spread these out on newspaper or other material and just leave them in a dark or dry place, and they'll dry over time all by themselves. You could thread them, if you wanted to, put them on threads and let them hang so they're individually hung like this somewhere in another, again in the dark, dry place, and they will dry over time. How long does it take to dry? It's hard to tell. You really just have to come back until you feel them and they feel like they're light and dry, and they'll be quite firm at that point. You don't want any real sponginess like that, like it has right now. Another option would be to use your oven. So you could spread these out on the oven rack. I like the size of the pieces. They're not going to fall through the oven rack. They will shrink in size somewhat, but not a lot, believe it or not. Most of the moisture will leave it and leave it relatively the same size. So there's a number of ways. The one thing I would suggest you don't do it is do it in sunlight. My understanding is that sunlight can leach away some of the valuable medicinal qualities in the polypore. So that's the only thing I would recommend against, is putting it out in sunlight. Otherwise, there's any number of ways of drying them. So I'm going to spread these out on the racks from my dehydrator, and we'll show you what the finished product looks like in a minute. Now, when it comes to freezing, it's very much the same thing. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take big metal cookie trays, spread them out in the cookie trays, put them in the freezer until they're frozen, and then I'll put them in the heavy-duty freezer bags and try to bring as much air out of them as possible. I suppose I could even go so far as to use a food saver or some other vacuum sealer to remove as much oxygen as possible. The reason I spread them out on the tray is so that once they're frozen, they won't clump together too hard and come out as a solid mass. I can reach into a bag and bring some out individually and not as one giant mass. Now, we'll talk in a minute about how I go about using these after they're dried or after they're frozen. But for now, I'm going to spread these out. I got to get them on the dehydrator today, and then we'll get them all dried up. Now, if you don't get it done the same day or within the day or so of harvesting them, if you don't get them dried right away, no big deal. However, I will tell you, the longer you wait, the harder they are to work with, because as they dry, like I said, they do get harder to cut. You know, if you were to take these and cut them and then freeze them, and because you didn't have a chance to dry them right away, and then took them out in small batches to dry, same deal. It's going to work the same way. So either way is just as good as the other. So let me get these put on. We'll get them dried, and I'll show you what the finished product looks like. Okay, so I just put out 3 pieces, or 3 different types. This is the fresh ones. That's from the batch that I have yet to get dried today. And you can see still how flexible they are. You can actually, if you look close, you can see the moisture in them. This is a dried one. So it probably would have started off close to the same size. It definitely is thinner than it was when I started. But you can see this is much harder to bend. If I bend it hard enough, it's not going to snap, but it's like hard leather. So that's what a dried one would look like. And here's a frozen one. And the frozen one, well, this one is still frozen, but you can see they really haven't changed in their looks all that much. If anything, I guess the dried one is slightly darker in color, but for the most part, well, if you look at that one, it's the same color as the white one, or as the fresh one, sorry. So look at those 3 pieces, not much difference at all. So that just shows you how much of their original integrity they retain as they dry or as they're frozen. Okay, so that is a fresh one, a dried one, a frozen one. Now let's talk about how I use them. All right, when it comes time for me to make up some or cook up some Birch Polypore and make a medicinal drink out of it, I have the luxury of also having some chaga in my collection that I've collected over the years, all dried up. Probably should have chopped it up into smaller pieces than this, but that's what I have right now. Very hard, not impossible, but very hard to do it now. The softer pieces can be broken up still, but it works out just as well. I don't have to make them any small. I also have quite a bit of turkey tail here as well. So turkey tail is another great medicinal mushroom that you can add to. So all of them together I'll put into my slow cooker here. This is a larger slow cooker given to us many years ago. And I'll put them all in there. I'll boil up water on the stove upstairs. I'll pour it on top of the mushrooms. I'll fill this up with a collection about this amount. And then I'll put the slow cooker on the keep warm. Not low, not high, but the keep warm function. And I'll leave it there for a few hours. One of the things, and I think a few viewers picked it up on my earlier video, is that it looked as if I was boiling the Birch Polypore. In fact, it was just simmering on a low simmer, but it did roll, so it looked like it was boiling. In truth, you really just want a low simmer. You don't want this to boil because that will destroy some of the medicinal value found in the mushroom. So if I have found using the slow cooker, as long as I just have it on the keep warm function, it is hot enough to extract a good amount of the value into the tea. Now that makes 4 or 5 liters of juice or extract, if you will. So I will put that into a container. Glass is the preference, and I'll put it in the fridge and I'll keep it there for about a week or so, and I'll have a glass a day. I've said this before and it is still true. While chaga has a great taste, or at least I find it has a great taste all by itself, Birch Polypore can be quite bitter. So the combination of the two, it doesn't seem to lessen the bitterness of the Birch Polypore very much. So I sweeten it usually with a little bit of honey, and I do that when I go to drink it. So just a little bit of honey in the glass. Now, I've come to enjoy that, quite honestly. That little bit of bitterness with the sweetness mixed in seems to be a nice medicinal drink. So, just one other thing I want to say about the Birch Polypore before we wrap this video up is that what we're doing is known as an infusion. So it's making a tea, if you will, an infusion with hot water. Not a decoction, because I'm not looking to lower the volume of the water any, although some will, of course, boil off or at least evaporate during the process. But I'm looking to make an infusion. One alternative you can do is to put this into a jar, add an alcoholic beverage like vodka or white rum or something, and leave it set for 4 to 6 weeks, and you'll get what's known as a tincture. I don't have a lot of experience with tinctures, so I'm not about to explain how to do that. I'm sure that somebody else can do a much better job on tinctures. But both alcohol and water, or alcohol tinctures, an alcohol extraction actually, and a water infusion, both draw off different components from the mushroom. So you'll get the best of both worlds if you can make both. And actually, if you're just putting it in alcohol, alcohol has water, which will do a slow infusion as well as an extraction from the alcohol. So I guess if you're looking to get the most from your mushrooms, an alcohol tincture is the way to get the most out of them. Okay, that's enough about how I harvest, how I prepare them, and how I store them, as well, again, as how I will use them at a later date. Let's wrap this video up. Okay, just before we wrap this video up, let's just talk about the Birch Polypore and chaga for a second. Both of these grow on birch trees. Both of these will concentrate a lot of the medicinal value from the birch tree itself. The reason I liked Birch Polypore, not necessarily the bitterness, but why I like to harvest and use the Birch Polypore is because it's a much more sustainable mushroom. As you may be aware, chaga grows on living birch trees, and it takes a long time for the mushroom really to develop. If we harvest the chaga before it gets a chance to release its spores, then we've kind of slowed or even prevented the chaga from propagating again on the same or other birch trees. In addition, if we take all the chaga off of the tree right down to as far as we can get into the mycelium, into the wood, we've then opened that living birch tree up to outside infection, hastening its demise. On the other hand, Birch Polypores grow only on dead birch trees. And the nice thing is, they'll grow continually on the same dead birch tree from year to year. So if you find a tree that has fresh birch polypores on it this year, go back the same time next year, and you're likely to find more on the same tree. So that's a much more sustainable practice. In truth, chaga does taste better. Birch polypore, though, has pretty much the same medicinal value. Now, one thing I didn't mention is when to go harvest the birch polypores. So here in Nova Scotia, we start seeing these appear in our birch trees early October. Right now it's the end of October and they're out there. I don't see any new emerging ones, and most of these look like they've been out for a week or two, but they're still in prime shape. I could wait it longer into the winter. They'd still be good. Just get them before they turn black on the bottom and they've released all their spores, because that's when they're freshest and they still have the highest concentration of medicinal value in them. Okay, let's wrap this video up. And in wrapping it up, I want to say one thing. As with all medicinal mushrooms, make sure you do your own research into identification, preparation, and use. This one is hard to confuse with anything else. There are other bracket fungus that grow on birch trees, but nothing looks quite like the birch polypore. Even so, even if you've positively identified the mushroom that you have as a birch polypore, and you prepare a tea or a tincture from it, you may want to consider trying a very small amount. Just because I take it and I benefit from it doesn't mean that you will, or that you'll react to it in the same way. So do your research, give it a try. I think you'll probably enjoy it. I know I do. It seems to do very well for keeping me healthy, especially during the winter months, and I'm sure it'll do the same for you. All right, that's all I have. If you have any questions or if you have any suggestions or any comments around the birch polypore, by all means leave them in the show notes below. But in the meantime, get out and explore. Take that path less traveled. It'll make all the difference. Bye for now.